My family abandoned me on a summer trip as a cruel joke, laughing as they drove away and saying, "Let's see if she can handle it." I never went back. And 15 years later, when they finally saw me again, what I had become left them completely shocked. The brake lights never came on. I stood in the middle of a dirt road in the Navajo Nation at 2:17 in the afternoon, watching my stepfather's Ford Expedition disappear into the heat. I kept waiting for it to stop. I kept waiting for someone inside that SUV to say, "Okay, that's enough, turn around." I kept waiting for my mother to look through the back window, see her 17-year-old daughter standing alone beside her backpack, and decide they had taken the joke far enough. The SUV reached a bend in the road. Then it disappeared. I was 17 years old. I had half a granola bar, 2 t-shirts, a water bottle that was already 3/4 empty, and a phone with 4% battery. Before the screen died, I took one picture, the rear license plate of the SUV. I didn't know why I did it. Maybe some part of me understood before the rest of me did that this wasn't a joke with a punchline coming later. I was the punchline. I sat beside my backpack, the same backpack my stepfather Richard had thrown into the dirt after I complained that his son Mason had poured an entire can of Sprite into it. My clothes were soaked. My journal was ruined. So was a library book I had borrowed from one of my teachers. And I cried for exactly 11 minutes. Then I stopped, partly because I knew every tear was water I couldn't afford to lose, and partly because something inside me had changed. I picked up my backpack and started walking. To understand how I ended up on that road, you need to understand my family. My legal name now is Aaron Voss. Voss was my father's name. He died of a heart attack when I was 9. He was quiet, patient, and the kind of man who kept a jar of peppermints on his desk. He used to call me his best researcher because I could spend an entire Saturday in the library looking things up simply because I wanted to know the answers. After he died, my mother Linda slowly became someone I barely recognized. 2 years later, she married Richard Calloway. Richard was loud, confident, and very good at making everyone around him feel like his attention was something valuable he had chosen to give them. My mother loved that about him. Richard had a son named Mason, 14 months younger than me. Mason had inherited his father's need for attention without inheriting much of his competence. My cousin Brooke was 2 years older than me and wanted to become a documentary filmmaker. She carried a Canon camera everywhere and filmed practically everything. By the summer I was 17, I had been part of this family for 6 years. I knew how it worked. I was quiet, I got good grades, I stayed out of trouble and mostly stayed out of everyone's way. Richard called that attitude. My mother called it ingratitude. Mason saw it as permission to keep pushing me. The trip to Arizona was supposed to be my graduation gift. Richard planned a road trip through the Southwest, the Grand Canyon, Monument Valley, the Navajo Nation. When my mother told me about it, I was genuinely excited. That's one of the parts that still bothers me. I was grateful. I actually wanted the trip to be good. By the second day, I should have realized it wouldn't be. We stopped at a diner outside Flagstaff for breakfast, and I ordered black coffee. I had been drinking coffee since I was 15 because I stayed up late reading. Richard looked at my mother and smiled. She thinks she's so grown. It was a small comment. I ignored it. By day 3, Brooke had started pointing her camera at me more than usual. At a rest stop outside Cameron, I went back to the SUV to grab my journal. When I returned, Brooke was standing about 15 feet away with the camera aimed directly at me. "What are you filming?" I asked. "Just the scenery." But she didn't lower the camera. Mason was sitting nearby, smiling at his phone. Again, I ignored it. A few hours later, we were driving through the reservation when Mason leaned across the back seat holding a full can of Sprite. Then he turned it upside down over my open backpack. Not accidentally. He poured the entire thing inside. My journal, my clothes, and the book I had borrowed from my teacher were soaked. I got angry, but I kept my voice controlled. I spoke to Richard because he was the adult. Richard told me to cool off. Then he pulled the SUV over. He got out, opened the back, grabbed my backpack, and threw it into the dirt. Then he got back behind the wheel. For a second, I thought he was just trying to scare me. My mother looked at me through the passenger window. She was wearing large, dark sunglasses. "Maybe this will teach you not to ruin everyone's vacation, Aaron." Mason leaned toward the window. "Let's see if she can handle it." He was grinning. Brooke already had her camera raised. I could see the red recording light. Then the SUV pulled back onto the road. I waited and waited. The brake lights never came on. The desert didn't kill me, but it changed me. For the first hour, I walked along the road. Then I realized I had no idea where it led. The heat became worse as the afternoon went on. Eventually, I found some shade beneath a sandstone overhang and forced myself to drink only a little water at a time because I didn't know how long it needed to last. My phone was dead. The granola bar was gone. Near dusk, I found a cattle fence running away from the road. I followed it. My reasoning was simple. A fence meant somebody used the land. And if somebody used the land, eventually there had to be people. I don't know how long I walked. At some point, my legs stopped cooperating. I remember the ground coming closer. Then I remember waking up with water in my mouth. The woman holding the canteen was in her 70s, with gray-streaked hair and the calm expression of someone who had dealt with emergencies before. Her name was Ruth. She ran cattle on family land about 2 miles from where she found me. She had been checking her fence line that evening when she noticed something beside one of the posts that didn't look like a rock. It was me. Ruth took me home. Her house was small and clean and smelled like coffee and wood smoke. She gave me water, soup, and then more water. She didn't ask questions that night. She waited until the next day. "Where is your family?" I told her everything. The trip. Mason, the Sprite, Richard throwing out my backpack, my mother watching through the window, Brooke filming, the SUV driving away. Ruth listened without interrupting. When I finished, I asked to use her phone. "I want to call the police." The sheriff's deputy came the next day. His name was Carl Whiting. When he saw me standing in Ruth's doorway, his expression confused me. It wasn't relief. It was something more complicated. "Aaron Calloway?" "Yes." "Your mother filed a missing person report." For 1 second, I thought maybe I had been wrong about everything. Then he looked at his clipboard. "She says you ran away after an argument that you left voluntarily." I stared at him. "That's not what happened." He took my statement. I showed him my backpack, still stained and sticky from the Sprite. I told him Brooke had filmed the entire incident. He wrote everything down and left. 2 days later, he returned. "Your stepfather gave a statement," he said. "He says you had been having behavioral problems throughout the trip. Your cousin's video shows you shouting at the family before you left." "Before?" He looked at me. "What does the video show after they left me?" He paused. "The footage ends there." And that was when I understood. They had already built their version of what happened. Brooke had edited the recording. Richard had given his statement. My mother had cried to the police and told them her unstable teenage daughter had run away. They had days to coordinate their story before anyone found me. "My mother knows I'm alive now?" "Yes." "And she isn't coming?" He didn't answer directly. Instead, he told me he would recommend a welfare check and suggested I speak with Child Protective Services about my options. Then he left. Ruth watched his car disappear from her kitchen window. "He's not going to help you," she said. "No. What are you going to do?" I sat at her kitchen table and looked down at my hands. They were completely steady. "I'm not going back." Ruth looked at me for a long moment. "Then you'll have to build something new." "I know." She poured 2 cups of coffee and put one in front of me. "Start with what you're good at." I thought about my father, about all those Saturdays in the library, about years of being the person who noticed things other people missed. "I'm good at finding things," I said, "and I'm patient." Ruth nodded. "Those are 2 very useful things to be good at." The next 12 years weren't easy. I entered Arizona's foster care system and aged out at 18. I finished high school through a correspondence program while living with a foster family in Flagstaff. With the help of a social worker and a partial scholarship, I got into Northern Arizona University. I majored in criminal justice. I minored in accounting after realizing that financial records could tell a story just as clearly as physical evidence. Money leaves tracks. So do lies. I graduated in 3.5 years. At 24, I applied to the FBI. At 25, I went through the academy. At 26, I was assigned to financial crimes in the Phoenix field office. And at 29, a file crossed my desk that changed everything. It had been flagged because of irregularities involving federal grant money. The grant involved millions of dollars distributed to a nonprofit consortium doing affordable housing work in Arizona. I was reading through the organizations involved when I saw one name, the Bring Aaron Home Foundation. I read it twice, then a third time. Bring Aaron Home, my name, my face, my disappearance. My mother had created the foundation 6 weeks after reporting me missing. While I was sitting at Ruth's kitchen table trying to figure out how to rebuild my life, my mother had been creating a missing person advocacy organization around me, and she had spent the next 15 years raising money with my story. I sat at my desk staring at the foundation's name for a long time. Then I took the file to my supervisor. "I need to disclose a conflict of interest." I placed the grant file on his desk beside my personnel file and pointed to the name in both. He read them, then looked at me. The foundation was named after you? Yes. And you think there's fraud? I think the financial structure warrants an investigation, but I can't be the person running it. He considered that. Then he told me I wouldn't investigate my family alone. Another senior agent would lead alongside me. Every interaction would be documented, and I would serve as a resource because nobody understood the people involved better than I did. I agreed. Before leaving his office, I told him there was something else. A video exists. What kind of video? Raw footage from the day my family abandoned me. My cousin recorded it. The version police saw was edited. I believe the original still exists. He told me to write the affidavit for a warrant. I wrote it that night. The investigation lasted 11 months. My co-lead was Senior Special Agent Marcus Webb, a white-collar crime specialist who cared about one thing: what the evidence could prove. That was exactly what I needed, and the evidence was extensive. Over 15 years, the Bring Aaron Home Foundation had received approximately $4 million through charitable donations, federal grants, and state housing funds. Only about $1.7 million could be clearly documented as legitimate program spending. The rest had moved through consulting contracts, vendors, and related companies connected to my family. Richard's development company had received hundreds of thousands of dollars in consulting fees. Brooks Media Company had been paid more than $200,000 to produce documentaries and public awareness material about my disappearance. Mason's property management company had received nearly $900,000 in affordable housing funds. The properties built with that money were supposed to provide affordable housing. Instead, many were being rented at market rate or higher. And through all of it, my face remained on the fundraising materials. My name remained attached to the foundation. People had donated money for 15 years because they believed they were helping a family find a missing teenage girl. A teenage girl her family had deliberately abandoned on the side of a road. Then we found something even worse. A former foundation bookkeeper had kept copies of internal records because she had become suspicious of the finances. She also confirmed that my mother had hired a private investigator years after I disappeared. The investigator had found me. His report confirmed that I was alive and enrolled at Northern Arizona University. My mother had received that report. She knew I was alive. She didn't tell law enforcement. She didn't shut down the foundation. She didn't correct the fundraising materials. She kept accepting donations. For years. We also interviewed a retired supervisor from the sheriff's department. He confirmed that Richard had contacted the department more than once after my disappearance, and that there had been pressure to keep my case classified as a runaway situation instead of investigating what had actually happened. But there was still one piece of evidence I wanted more than anything else: Brooks' camera footage. In the 9th month of the investigation, the warrant was executed. They found the hard drive. Brooke had labeled it in her own handwriting. Summer Breakdown, Raw. She had kept it for 12 years. Webb and I watched it together in a conference room. There I was, 17 years old, standing beside my backpack in the dirt. I watched Mason pouring Sprite into it. I watched myself get angry, but I wasn't screaming uncontrollably like Brooke's edited version had suggested. I was upset. My voice was controlled. Then Richard threw my backpack onto the road. My mother spoke through the window. Mason laughed. Brooke kept filming, and the SUV drove away. But this time the footage didn't end. The camera kept recording inside the SUV. For 23 more minutes. Webb took notes. I just watched. About 16 minutes after they left me, Richard's voice came through the speakers. Should we go back? My mother answered immediately. Not until she's scared enough. Then Mason spoke. What if she tells someone? And my mother answered again, calmly. Who would believe her? Webb stopped writing. He looked at me. I had spent 12 years imagining what might be on that recording. Some part of me had always known Brooke probably hadn't stopped filming when the version shown to police ended. But hearing my mother's voice was different. Not because it surprised me, because it confirmed that 17-year-old me had remembered everything correctly. They hadn't accidentally gone too far. They hadn't driven away expecting to circle back 5 minutes later. They had wanted me scared. And when someone inside the car questioned whether I might tell the truth, my mother's answer had been simple. Who would believe her? That's enough, Webb said. Yes, I said. It is. Months later, I walked into a federal interview room wearing a Navy suit and the badge I had spent 12 years earning. Across the table sat my family. My mother, Richard, Mason, Brooke. I watched their faces when I entered. My mother inhaled sharply. Richard went pale. Brooke immediately looked at the floor. Mason stared at me. For several seconds, nobody said anything. Then my mother whispered my name. Aaron. I sat down across from her. My legal name is Erin Voss. She stared at me. Voss? My father's name. I took it when I turned 18. Her eyes filled with tears. I had seen those tears before. When I was 17, sitting on Ruth's sofa, I had watched television footage of my mother, crying about her missing daughter. Now I knew that while she was appearing publicly as a devastated mother, she had already helped create the lie that I had voluntarily run away. I thought you were dead, she said. No, you didn't. Her face changed. I continued. We have testimony confirming that you received a private investigator's report showing I was alive and enrolled at Northern Arizona University. You didn't tell law enforcement. You didn't update the foundation's materials. You continued taking donations after you knew. She opened her mouth. I stopped her. I'm not here to have that conversation with you. The prosecutors are. Richard leaned forward. He still had that same expression I remembered from childhood, the expression of a man accustomed to being the authority in every room. You have no idea what really happened on that road. I looked at him. I have the original footage. Brooke flinched so hard her chair moved. The prosecutor sitting with us opened a laptop. Then she pressed play. For the first time in 15 years, my entire family watched the unedited version together. 17-year-old me stood in the dust. The SUV drove away. The recording continued. Minutes passed. Then Richard's voice came through the speakers. Should we go back? My mother's voice followed. Not until she's scared enough. Then Mason. What if she tells someone? And finally my mother. Who would believe her? Nobody moved. My mother closed her eyes. Richard stared at the wall. All the confidence seemed to drain out of him at once. Mason muttered something under his breath. Brooke started crying into her hands. I looked at all four of them. For years, I had imagined what this moment would feel like. I thought there would be rage, vindication, maybe satisfaction. Instead, I felt something much quieter. Everything was finally accurate. The story they had built for 15 years was gone. There was only the evidence. I looked at them. You left me on that road expecting fear to make me smaller. Nobody answered. Congratulations, you made me a federal agent instead. Then I stood up and walked toward the door. Behind me, Mason's chair scraped against the floor. For a second, I expected him to say something. Another insult, another joke. Something designed to make him feel powerful again. But nothing came. For once, Mason had nothing to say. I walked out. The charges were filed soon afterward. My mother pleaded guilty to charges related to wire fraud, false statements, and misuse of charitable funds. She received 4 years. Richard faced federal grant fraud, conspiracy, and obstruction charges. He went to trial. The jury found him guilty. He received 7 years. Mason was charged over the affordable housing money that had been routed through his company. The properties involved were eventually ordered transferred to a legitimate affordable housing organization, and he received 4 years. Brooke cooperated. Her testimony helped establish the chain of custody for the original footage and proved it hadn't been altered. She received probation and community service rather than prison. She was also required to surrender all materials connected to the documentary she had spent years creating about my disappearance. She had given it a title. Erin, A Story of Loss and Forgiveness. It was never released. Ruth came to Phoenix for the sentencing hearings. She sat quietly in the courtroom. Afterward, we went to dinner near the courthouse. She ordered green chili stew and spent most of the meal telling me about her cattle and the fence line. At one point, I asked her something I had wondered about for years. When you found me out there, did you know I was going to be okay? Ruth looked down at her food for a moment. I knew you were going to be something, she said. Then she looked at me. The okay part was yours to decide. I still visit her twice a year. I bring coffee. She makes soup. And sometimes we sit at the same kitchen table where I sat when I was 17 and told her I was never going back. I still work financial crimes. I still find what numbers are hiding. And I understand better than most people what happens when someone builds a story for an audience instead of telling the truth. My family spent 15 years doing exactly that with my face. They needed me to remain the missing girl, the runaway, the tragedy, the daughter who disappeared. What they never considered was what would happen if the girl they abandoned survived. Or what would happen if she grew up and learned how to investigate people who believed their own lies could protect them. The desert didn't make me angry. It made me precise. There's a difference. I learned that on a dirt road at 17 years old, staring at the back of an SUV and waiting for brake lights that never came on.